Okay, so much for erythrocytes. Let's start talking about leukocytes, the white blood cells. They make up, remember, less than 1% of your total volume, and I gave you a little puzzle earlier on. Since they, I said that your body makes a lot of white blood cells, why do they make up only less than 1% of your total blood volume? Remember, in the centrifuge tube, they're only the buffy coat. Let's see if we can figure out why, if your body makes so many white blood cells, they make up less than 1% of your blood volume. They leave capillaries via a process called diapedesis. And there's your answer. What happens is they seek out pathogens via something called positive chemotaxis. So look in that lower illustration there on the right. Splinter has gone in. It's broken the skin. Well, your skin, you've got millions of bacteria all over you, all over your body. The moment you break the skin, the bacteria get inside. What happens is white blood cells travel through the blood, and when they get near the site of an injury, they squeeze out. That's diapedesis. You can see there, some of them are squeezing out through little gaps in the cells of the vascular endothelium, the cells that make up the blood vessel. The white blood cells are squeezing out through those little gaps, and then they sniff out the bacteria or whatever invaders they are. That's positive chemotaxis. Invaders leave their own little molecules behind, and so the white blood cells are kind of like, those tracking dogs. They can smell where the bacteria are. They seek them out, and then they kill them, all right? So white blood cells, granulocytes, live for a matter of days after leaving the blood. Agranulocytes may live for many years. So those are the two categories of white blood cells, granulocytes and agranulocytes. And we'll talk more about those coming up, all right? But remember, the granulocytes live for just days. Agranulocytes can live for many years. Leukocytosis is the technical name for a high white blood cell count. What do you suppose that would mean? What would it mean if you had lots of white blood cells? If you get blood work done and they see a high white blood cell count, what does that mean? It means you probably got an infection somewhere, all right? That's how doctors do it, They come in to see you, they got a copy of your blood work, and they go, well, we think you've probably got a bacterial infection. You go, whoa, those doctors are so smart. They're just seeing that you got a high white blood cell count. A couple of night classes, you could be a doctor too. Usually with blood, they'll get what's called a differential white blood cell count. So not just the total number of white blood cells, but which ones, all right? Because white blood cells have different specialties. They do different things. So let's see if we can remember them. Never laugh at monkeys eating bananas, okay? So neutrophils make up 60 to 70% of all your white blood cells. Now, if you just remember they make up about 2/3, that'll be good enough. That's all I need. If I ever ask you, what percentage of your white blood cells are neutrophils? If you say about 2/3, we're good. Lymphocytes make up about 1/4 to 1/3. All right. Notice already we've got the overwhelming majority of your white blood cells. All right. 90% or thereabouts are neutrophils and lymphocytes. The rest are only a small number. Next come monocytes. They make up a handful, 3 to 8%. You have 5 fingers on a hand. 5 is kind of like in the middle of those two. So if I ever ask you what percent of your white blood cells are monocytes, if you say a handful, I'm good. Eosinophils, once again, about a handful. And basophils, hardly any. They're less than 1%. All right. Now we're going to talk about each of these in turn and learn what they do. Okay. Those are the 5 kinds of white blood cells: neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, basophils. So if you never laugh at monkeys eating bananas, notice that goes in order of their percents. All right. N for neutrophil, L for lymphocyte, and so on. All right. So there you go. Never laugh at monkeys. Don't do that. Okay. Don't do that either. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't laugh at them, all right? Please, don't. They're sensitive. Don't hurt their feelings. So granulocytes, here's our first category. Remember, there are 2 main categories of white blood cells, granulocytes and agranulocytes. Granulocytes include neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. These are larger and shorter lived than red blood cells. Remember, we've seen slides of blood cells. White blood cells are huge compared to red blood cells, but they're shorter lived. Remember, red blood cells live 3 to 4 months about. They usually have lobed nuclei, so if you look in the diagrams there in the illustrations, you can see the nuclei have lobes on them, okay? They're phagocytic, so they eat bad guys. They eat like bacteria and stuff like that. They actually gobble them up. They're called granulocytes because they have visible granules. So when they first looked at these under microscopes, you can see, if you look at all the illustrations there, how they're like all those little dots inside. Those little dots are granules. Those granules contain chemicals that will be released by the white blood cells. Those chemicals are what they use to help kill bad guys, okay? Let's consider neutrophils first. They are the most numerous, again about 2/3. They're also called polymorphonuclear leukocytes. Poly, many, morph, shape, nuclear, nucleus. So the nucleus has many different shapes. So neutrophils usually have several different lobes, but there's no regular configuration. They're just kind of bundled all over the place. They usually have 3 to 5 lobes. Sometimes they make little smiley faces, like in that slide in the upper right. They have sort of a lilac color, and again, that's not their normal color. It's when they get stained. You have to use stains in order to see them. So they stain a lilac color. They're usually the first to arrive. So when you have an infection of some sort, the blood is carrying white blood cells, neutrophils are usually the first to get there. Again, because they're the most numerous, all right? And remember, then they get out via diapedesis, it's called. They squeeze out between the gaps in the cells of the blood vessel wall, and then they find the bad guys using positive chemotaxis. They sniff them out. Now, the granules contain various hydrolytic enzymes or defensins. These are things that hurt the bad guys. We call it the respiratory burst. So they release these granules, they burst open, and all these harmful chemicals then leak out, and they're what kill the bad guys. They're very phagocytic. They gobble up bad guys like crazy, and they also kill them with this respiratory burst. So remember, neutrophils, their specialty, bacteria. They are the bacterial specialists, okay? Now then, the next one, eosinophils. They stain red. That eosin, root word Greek, meaning dawn. You know, like the red in the morning, sailor take warning, red at night, sailor's delight. They stain a reddish color. They usually have 2 lobes. And remember, there's only a handful of these guys. Hardly any of these things out there. Red to crimson is their coloration. Coarse lysosome-like granules, so the granules are kind of fuzzy, irregular in shape. These specialize in parasitic worms and other invaders. They also, you have high eosinophil counts for various allergies. So what they do is, a lot of, like in the lower left, you see there's a parasitic worm. That's too big to be eaten. None of your white blood cells can eat something that big. So instead, what the eosinophils do is they just swarm it, and they release all kinds of harmful chemicals to kill it, all right? And they also respond to other parasites that are tagged by antibodies, the IgE antibodies. We'll talk about those later. But once again, so what's the specialty? Eosinophils, they specialize in parasites that are too large to be eaten, okay? Then basophils. These are the rarest. Hardly any of these, less than 1%. Large purplish-black basophilic granules that may obscure the nucleus. So that's the way you can spot them. When we did labs, we're not doing them when we're online, but the models, basophils were easy to spot because they have so many granules that sometimes you can't even see the lobes of the nucleus. So look in that slide in the upper right. All those granules actually obscure the lobes. That's the giveaway for spotting a basophil. Granules contain histamine and heparin. So histamine is a vasodilator. Basophils are helpful in producing inflammation. All right, histamine, a vasodilator. So they cause blood cells to get bigger in diameter. Therefore, more blood comes to the area. That's their whole purpose, really. That's one of their huge purposes. You want more blood to get to the area where there's an infection, because blood is carrying both more white blood cells to fight the bad guys and more nutrients to feed your white blood cells and also to help repair tissues that may have been damaged by the infection. So histamine is a vasodilator, but the problem is when you bring lots of blood to the area, you increase the probability of clotting, right? So they also release heparin, which is an anticoagulant. How clever is that? bring more blood to the area, but then try to make sure that you don't get spurious clots, so release some heparin as well. Both of these increase the blood flow, which assists the migration of other white blood cells to the area. Now, they're functionally similar to mast cells. Mast cells are kind of like a special category of white blood cell that are found in connective tissue, not so much in the blood. But both mast cells and basophils release histamine, and as we'll see later on when we look at the immune system, these guys are sometimes called the troublemakers because occasionally they overreact and release too much and cause too much inflammation, which can become problematic. Okay, an elevated neutrophil count would be indicative of what? An allergic reaction, an acute bacterial infection, a parasitic infection, a viral infection, or cancer. When the doctor sees a high neutrophil count, what does the doctor say? Oh, looks like you've got a bacterial infection. Yeah, a couple of night classes you could do the same thing. So take a look. Can you spot who's who? You should be able to. Who's that on the left? Yeah, that's a neutrophil, a polymorphonuclear lymphocyte. Lots of lobes, all right? Who's that in the middle? The color is the giveaway. That's an eosinophil. And then who's that on the right? So many granules you can't barely even see the nucleus. That's a basophil. See? A couple of night classes you could be a lab tech too, all right? Now then, the agranulocytes. A, oftentimes at the front of the word A or an, means without. So the agranulocytes are the white blood cells without granules, except actually they have them. What happens is when they were first discovering these things, the primitive light microscopes, the granulocytes, you could clearly see the granules. In the agranulocytes, you couldn't see the granules. But as microscopes got better, as it turns out, they do have granules, but the name stuck. We still call them agranulocytes, even though they actually do have granules. So the agranulocytes are the other two. Remember the 5 different kinds of white blood cells. The 2 that are left over that we haven't talked about are the lymphocytes and the monocytes. They lack visible cytoplasmic granules, but they really are there. They have spherical or kidney-shaped nuclei. Spherical are the lymphocytes, kidney-shaped are the monocytes. All right? So there you see lots of, look at how they're the same. Feline, canine, those are cats and dogs. A lot of mammals have very similar white blood cells. So, let's look at lymphocytes. Remember, they're roughly a fourth to a third. Remember, never laugh. They were the second most common. Large, dark purple, circular nuclei with a thin rim of blue cytoplasm. So in this case, the nucleus almost completely fills the cell. So look at the slide in the lower right. See how the dark nucleus fills almost the entire cell, okay? That's the key giveaway when you're trying to spot lymphocytes in a slide. A spherical nucleus. They're mostly in lymphoid tissue. Very few circulate in the blood. So lymphoid tissue, when we get to the immune system, we'll talk about that. But you already heard about like your lymph nodes. That's where you have most of your lymphocytes. They also kind of hang out in various other places, in the spleen, for example. We'll see that later when we get to the immune system. They are crucial to immunity. In fact, they are sort of at the core. When we say that you're immune to something, what we're really saying is that you have lymphocytes for that particular bad guy, okay? There are 3 kinds of lymphocytes, T cells, and their full name is T lymphocyte. Just keep that in your head. Remember, we nickname them T cells, but really they are T lymphocytes. They act against virus-infected cells and tumor cells. So T cells mostly kill cells of your own body that have been infected. So like when a virus takes over your cell, it's like that cell's been bitten by a zombie. If you've been bitten by a zombie, you're going to turn into a zombie. You have to die. If a cell in your body is infected by a virus, that cell is going to turn into a virus factory. That cell has to die. So who kills that cell? T cells. They kill infected cells. They also kill when you have invaders from within. Tumor cells are basically when you get invaded from the inside instead of from the outside. And T cells also kill cancer cells. B cells, they can eat bad guys. They also give rise to what are called plasma cells. Plasma cells are the ones that crank out antibodies. So B cells are crucial for the immune response. They are what make your antibodies. There's a third kind of lymphocyte called a natural killer cell. And don't you wish that was your name, natural killer? You know, those times when they say, state your name, last name first, you go killer, natural. What an awesome name. They're similar to T cells. They kill bad guys that have been tagged by antibodies. So antibodies wander through your body, and basically what they do is they just tag bad guys. They handcuff bad guys. They don't actually kill them. Then natural killer cells wander through your body. They look for anything that's attached to an antibody, and then they kill it. All right? So, monocytes, the last of the white blood cells that we haven't looked at yet. They're the largest of all. They make up a handful again, 3 to 8%. They have this pale blue cytoplasm and a dark purple staining kidney-shaped nucleus. That's how you can spot the monocytes. They have a kidney bean-shaped nucleus. Okay? Monocytes leave the circulation. These are the ones, so they're like werewolves. Monocytes leave the blood cell. They're the one that get out via diapedesis, and they morph into macrophages. All right, macrophages are like 5 times larger, and macrophages are just these horrendous cells. They are voracious eaters of bad guys. See, the other white blood cells we call microphages. They can eat a few bad guys. These are macrophages. They gobble up tons of bad guys. They're very actively phagocytic. They're crucial against viruses, intracellular bacterial parasites, and chronic infections. They eat up everything. Plus, they eat up all the debris. When your immune system is responding, it's like there's a war going on inside. There's like a battlefield. And on the battlefield, there are going to be dead bodies and, leftover equipment and stuff like that. Macrophages just eat it all. They eat bad guys. They eat all the leftover debris. They just gobble up everything. So they are active lymphocytes, and they activate other lymphocytes to mount an immune response. So when they gobble up the bad guys, they sort of alert the rest of the immune system, hey, these bad guys are out there. You guys need to get to work. And there in the upper right, you see at the macrophage restaurant. My wife will have the lice streptococci and plasma sauce, and I'll have the cellular debris. Dressing on that, pus. And then later, darling, you have some DNA stuck between your teeth. Thanks, dear. Okay.